Hey, good morning. Welcome to Your Personal Health. And we're taking baby steps today. We're going to do this with Dr. Kim Burris and also Dr. Michael, or excuse me, Krista Burris and Dr. Michael Kim. Good morning, Dr. Michael. I
Good
know
morning. How you doing, Jeff?
your pilot or co-pilot is missing this morning.
Oh, it's the pilot. Yes. No. She's running a little late, but she will be here.
That's the reality of a live show, and the fact that Dr. Burst and Dr. Kim are still or are working physicians, and they have a place in Rancho Mirage that is a little bit unique. Let's take just a second while we're waiting for Dr. Burst to arrive and tell us a little bit about Coachella Valley Direct Primary Care Physicians and how it's different from, let's say, a regular doctor's office.
Yeah. We have been in the valley for over 15 years, and Dr. Burris is trained as an internal medicine and pediatric, and I do family medicine. And really, what we wanted to do is, create a clinic where we really are able to put people first. Not that all doctors don't do that. We have wonderful colleagues out there, but the system in general, the healthcare system, seems to now be something where it feels like it's just a numbers game from every side. And I know people experience that for the most part. Long wait times, can't get in to see your physician. You have 8 minutes. They seem to be on the computer or in and out fast, and that's just not a way that is enjoyable for anyone. And we felt like it wasn't a really um, at keeping people at their healthiest. So we decided to go with a model called direct primary care, where we have a contract between each person, and we are able to then really think about each person and try to get them to the healthiest that they want to be and their goals. And we can become like it was turning back the clock a little, where things aren't as rushed, and we're really helping people, and we're available when they have questions and needs.
Well, it's interesting you talk about that relationship between the patient and the doctor. And I think, what could be more valuable, Dr. Kim, than our health? And it reminds me of that saying that says, a man with perfect health has 1,000 goals. The person with poor health has only one, and that's they wish they were healthy. And having that relationship with the primary care physician versus, again, not a knock on the doctors, this the way the system has evolved into, of 8 minute spurts. It's really hard to have. It's like speed dating without the dating. And I enjoy the relationship we have whenever I have a question or my wife has a question. We're both patients or members of the program, and that's a little bit of a twist too. Is changing from I'm a patient to I'm a member, and that's a different, kind of like the old saying is, membership has its privileges. Like, we can pick up the phone and call you. We can send a text. We don't have to come necessarily in the office. You offer telemedicine, things of that nature. It really has changed the way that COVID kind of forced that, but you guys were already way ahead of the curve at that point. It really has changed the way we interact with you as our doctors.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think in any industry, it's as long as you're doing things that make sense, then when things get thrown at you, you can adapt. The current medical system, when the pandemic hit, it really caused a lot of havoc, because the system revolved around getting people in and out of the office as much and as fast as you can. And when that didn't occur, it really was a problem for a lot of primary care doctors.
Well, talking about the problem for primary care doctors, I remember before when we first started our relationship that we were talking about the fact that there's already a shortage nationwide and even here in the Coachella Valley for direct primary care, or excuse me, primary care physicians and pediatricians. What effect did the whole COVID thing have? Did it have that great resignation, if you will, hit? Did the medical industry take that hit when it came to primary care physicians?
It did. I mean, doctors that were holding on for maybe another 3, 4, 5 years decided it was just time to retire. There were, um, just like everything, the doctors' offices had to um, slow down significantly, and so their income generation went down, and so they were in trouble. You would think that, why would a doctor's office, you know, be affected? Well, the payments revolve around being able to bill on, we saw X amount of people for this amount of things. And so yeah, as things are opening back up and, the demand is there, the amount of staff and the amount of actual providers that are available are even less. And before the
Mm.
pandemic, I mean, there were a lot of people that were not open. I mean, what happens for a physician is you have X amount of people under your care. And when you feel like you've reached a goal where you can't take care of it anymore, you close your panel until there's turnover. But that means if someone calls and says, "Hey, my insurance says I can see you," they say, "I'm sorry, I'm full," and so
Mm.
you have to find another physician in your insurance catalog that will take you that is open. So that is even less now because quite a few um, physicians have either transitioned to a different um, type of practice or they retired.
Now, when you say they transition, do you mean is that where people just? I mean, I know we talked about it a long time ago. Just shortly after COVID hit, doctors were just literally saying, "Hey, I'm retiring. I'm done. I'm shutting my office." And those people that were on his panel, you said, how many people typically are on a doctor's panel?
It could be anywhere from like 2 to 4 thousand.
So all of a sudden, those 2 to 4 thousand people were literally left without a doctor, and now they were having to go back into that system and try to find a doctor within the network to try to absorb them. I can't even imagine that there's a percentage of those people that are still without doctors.
Oh, for sure. And the urgent cares are feeling the brunt of it. The ER is feeling the brunt of it, and there are hopefully some new physicians coming in because Eisenhower and Desert has a residency program, and I don't know the percentage that actually stay within the valley.
Hmm.
But I would imagine it's not enough to the influx because it just feels like there's more people coming to the valley. And if we had a problem before the pandemic and before this influx, that we are going to feel it. I think in the next 2, 3, 4 years for sure.
Wow. Well, let's talk about the valley because you've been in the valley for quite some time. And have you seen the mix change from, let's say, older, more retirement age people to now? Are there more families, and has that demographic really changed much?
It's hard to say because we only see a certain slice of it, but it feels like both um, demographics are growing. It's not one is overtaking the other. I do think there are more younger families of people with people who have families here, and there at least for sure during COVID there was an influx of people toward the retirement age or later in life, and so I think there's both. And I mean, I think this valley is designed for that in the sense that there's a lot of resources for people to retire, but there are also a lot of resources for families, and so um,
I see these large. Oh, there she is. There's Dr. Burris. I see these large corporations starting to come into the valley, and I know there's a huge megaplex being built out on the freeway and Cook in the freeway that is going to, once it's open, it will have hundreds, if not thousands, of new employees and activities and that type of thing going on. It seems to me that as I drive up and down the streets of the Coachella Valley, I see nothing but either new or enlarged elementary schools going on, which tells me, geez, they must be building for growth, or they've just overgrown what they have and they just have to add more schools. Or like some, I think it's Lincoln Elementary on Portola. I think now it's a double decker where it used to be a single story, and it's just really growing. And I may be a little off on that, but I know it's really enlarged because it's where it used to be a playground is now building. With that in mind, it really segues perfectly into welcoming Dr. Burris and talking about childcare and really the segment we're talking about is really that 0 to 6, that parent who says, "Hey, I have a child coming." Or there's a new baby that has arrived and is 0 to 6 months, and we're kind of talking about that today. And today we're talking about, hey, as a parent, if we're talking mothers, and we're saying Is it breastfeeding or bottle feeding? What is better, and are there pros and cons to that?
Yes, and I think that it's always wise to sort of step back sometimes and take a 50,000-foot view of an issue like this, because the controversy over feeding actually goes back hundreds of years, not just recent times. But I think since the advent of commercially available formula, there's been swings in the cultural attitudes regarding the two different approaches to feeding. And in in the past, there was actually a period of time where formula feeding was recommended. And then we went through a period where formula feeding was seen as somehow shameful. And now we've arrived at the present day where you can find pretty much a group who supports every particular perspective there is. So, what I'm going to do is approach this really with my doctor hat on and talk about what's best for the baby, the pros and cons of bottle feeding and breastfeeding, and the sort of approach that I use to sort of help counsel my patients and their parents when they're experiencing a difficulty about feeding decision making. So the answer to which is best is it depends on what's best for you and your child. So there is no one size fits all solution in parenting for a lot of things, and feeding is in one of those things. So in general, we encourage people to consider breastfeeding because of the advantages that breastfeeding has. And probably one of the biggest advantages in my mind for breastfeeding is convenience and cost. And although from a health perspective, this may seem like, well, why is that important? Well, the answer is because if you've run out of formula and you don't have enough money to um, purchase it, or you don't have access to it, say in the middle of a storm, this actually can be a problem. And I don't know about you, but I've had to travel with my children, things come up, and there are times when parents will water down formula to stretch it, and that actually can be very dangerous for a young infant. The reason is because their electrolyte balance is very finicky, and if you end up giving them too much water for the amount of salt in their food, it can actually cause seizures. So, because of that, breastfeeding has the advantage of being free, basically, except for feeding mom an extra 300 to 500 calories a day. And it has the other benefit of providing really good immune support, especially in that first 6 months. So, a newborn infant is born with an immature immune system. They're just not able to fight off things like they will when they're older. And it's not until they're about 2 years old that they've actually got their full immune system working on their behalf. So before that, they're vulnerable. And especially in that first 6 months. And what's so cool about breast milk is that in breast milk, the mother actually is transferring a range of her own antibodies to the infant and helping to protect the infant, especially during those first few months. So, because of that, breastfeeding, especially in those first few months, provides a lot of extra protection for the baby. So, for a lot of women, they might choose to sort of take advantage of that and start off with breastfeeding and then transition to formula as needed. And there's absolutely nothing wrong also with doing a combination of breastfeeding and formula feeding. However, I do recommend that if people are planning to breastfeed for a while, that they focus on just breastfeeding for the first few weeks to make sure that their milk supply is well established. Because the more the baby eats, the better the milk supply will be. So if a mom is doing too much supplementing with formula first off, then it's possible that her milk supply won't be sufficient and she may end up getting discouraged and stopping earlier than she would have. There's a lot that we can talk about with just breastfeeding. But I want to sort of talk about the pros and cons first. So we've talked about some of the pros of breastfeeding in that it's pretty much free, always available, and it has the added benefit of immune support. The cons of breastfeeding are that ties it only to one person for the most part to be able to do feeding, unless the mom also wants to pump extra milk and provide that, store it, and let someone else feed that later. That actually starts to increase the costs of breastfeeding because that means that you need a pump, and the most efficient ones are electric, which are a little more expensive but can often be rented from hospitals. But it also means the mom has to put extra time in, not just feeding the infant, but then pumping separately, which can be difficult. There are some laws in the state of California to help protect moms who go back to work who are trying to pump. And if you work for a business that has over a certain number of employees, your employer is required to provide you a clean and private place to pump, and an ability to store your milk while you're there. So for a lot of women, when they go back to work and they're trying to pump and they're trying to do only breastfeeding, it can be really stressful. And this is a setting where I encourage people to consider having the option of supplementing with formula if they don't have enough breast milk, or say something happens to breast milk and they're not able to provide it, or it goes missing, or someone accidentally throws it away. I can't even tell you how many times I've seen women in tears in a break room because somebody else threw away their milk supply. So, I know that I'm mostly talking, but you actually have a lot of experience with feeding our kids, even in that early period. And from a dad's perspective, what do you think about the differences between using a stored breast milk or using formula? How easy is it to do either? Which do you prefer? That kind of thing.
Well, the ease is going to be the formula because you can whip the powder, put it in, make it right away and feed it in a bottle. And, so that, I mean, there's no waking someone up saying, hey, it's time to feed. And this cranky person saying, I just fed. And you saying, well, no, that was only 2 hours ago, so it's time to eat again. So the bottle is, the formula is the ease. It's not hard doing the breast milk. There is some cataloging you have to do because the breast milk will go bad, so you can't keep it indefinitely. Same with the formula. Once it's been used, if it hasn't, then it can store a little bit longer. But in any case,
once you made it into a liquid?
Once you made it into liquid. Okay. So, but the breast milk, you have to thaw it. You have to then pour it in the bottle, and so that takes a little bit of time. So there's a bit of planning involved, but it wasn't horrible. I think it helped you and us when our lives are, crazy because, you know, talking about breastfeeding and bottle feeding, people think about, well, the ideal situation, but no one lives the ideal life. Life is crazy. And so, realistically, probably most families will do both, or combination depending on what's going on, because it is hard for women to breastfeed, pump, and go to work. Even if you're not, that you didn't mention about, if you're breastfeeding, you have to watch your diet, because there are a lot of things that can be passed on to the breast milk, and some just make the baby you know more awake, and some can have more harm. So um,
Right. And, a lot of moms will notice that when they eat certain foods that the baby has more gas, or maybe doesn't want the milk. So sometimes it's surprising what you can and can't eat. What is interesting is those types of things that are passed on to the baby through the breast milk don't always correlate to problems with that food later on in that kid's life. For instance, some people notice that they can't have dairy when they're breastfeeding, or else the baby starts to throw up. But then later, that child isn't necessarily going to be lactose intolerant. It's a very funny little thing.
well, it's complicated
Yeah,
and
it's
complex.
complicated.
The other thing is that a lot of women are going to have problems. It's not like the baby latches on and you're like, all is great. If the shape of the mouth, the shape of the breast, all that takes into account, and it's a learned skill. It's not like you do it and it's great, and then you're up against the clock because the baby needs to feed, and if the baby's not feeding, you go into jaundice. Anyway, with the bottle, you can change the size of the shape of everything right away easily. So, but I found that bottle feeding was a lot easier in the sense of the baby getting it versus not.
I think that's a really important thing. There are women who don't have much of a learning curve with breastfeeding, who someone shows them how to do it, they take to it, the baby figures it out, and boom, they're good. But I would say for most people, that's not their experience, especially with their first baby, that there is an actual learning process here. There's skill involved, and it's a need for you, if you're having any difficulties, to reach out. Most hospitals have lactation classes or lactation
Yeah.
consultants. Um, and I really highly recommend um, meeting with one of them if you're having any problems and you're trying to breastfeed. It should not hurt. You should not bleed. It should not be cracking. And it shouldn't be this long-term frustration for women. It should be a positive experience. So there are situations where the mom doesn't want to breastfeed, or there's just other problems. Like, there are situations where the mom has a risk of passing on an infectious disease, or there are a whole host of things where the mom may say, no, I actually don't want to breastfeed, this is not going to work well for me. And that is totally fine. It also may be just overwhelming for the mom to do breastfeeding, because that means that it again ties it all to her, and it's a tremendous drain on your time. So if you have other children that need to be cared for, or you just emotionally can't be that tired, um, formula feeding will be fine. And there are multiple different formulas out there, but you want to look for formula that is basically um, has all the important things for the newborns in it, and doesn't have a whole bunch of stuff that you don't want. Most of the major brands are going to check the boxes for having the basic ingredients. A lot of times, people will forget that babies need iron. And so many of the formulas are iron fortified. There are just some babies who, for whatever reason, don't tolerate iron, and if you are worried that your baby's not tolerating the formula you've chosen, this is a really important thing to discuss with your pediatrician. There are a whole host of reasons that babies have problems with either vomiting or food avoidance, um, constipation or diarrhea. It's not necessarily the formula, but it could be. So this is definitely an area, if you think your um, baby is having difficulties with the formula that you're currently using, to reach out to your doctor.
This is a very in-depth topic, obviously, for breastfeeding. It's not, I would say, from the male's perspective, it's not as cut and dry and obvious as possible. Like you said, it's not, there's a large majority of women out there that just breastfeeding is not a natural thing for them to do, and they might need to get a hold of the hospital and take the classes that you suggested. Now, do they have that here at Eisenhower as well? They have classes like that at Eisenhower or Desert Regional Medical Center?
Yes, as far as I understand, probably all the three major hospitals in the Valley, JFK, Eisenhower, and Desert, have lactation support available. And I recommend at whichever hospital you deliver, if you're at a hospital, ask to speak to the lactation consultant before you leave the hospital if you're wanting to breastfeed. Just meeting with them, they'll be able to give you the information about support after you leave the hospital. Even if things are going well, it's good just to meet up with them and get that information. If you've delivered somewhere else, either out of the valley or at home or somewhere else, go ahead and call your local hospital, or ask your pediatrician to refer you to one of the lactation consultants.
I think one of the biggest takeaways that I gathered from today was the fact that there were no really downsides if you're a parent who says, "Hey, you know what? I either A, don't want to breastfeed, or B, I want to do a mixture of both, or I just want to do the bottle feeding." It sounds like it's more socially accepted, and with the formulas being able to supplement the baby properly, there's really no downside in the decision. Is that correct?
I think that you can grow a healthy, happy baby using either approach or mixing the approaches. And really, that's our end goal, is to grow a healthy, happy baby.
I love
Um, then I I always encourage people, unless there's a significant reason not to breastfeed, to give it a try because of the pros as far as bonding with the mom and that antibody protection, and the cost savings. So I always say, give it a try. If it's not for you, that's okay. There's great formulas available. Don't worry about it. But you may find that it's a better experience than you were thinking.
Yeah. Hey, if you just joined us, this is Your Personal Health. We've just taken a little bit of a detour here, and we're talking about that infant between 0 and 6 months, and really the care for them, and really kind of the drive of this is they don't come out with a handbook and said, here's a step-by-step process on how to raise your newborn to 6 months. And Dr. Burris and Dr. Kim at Coachella Valley Direct Primary Care, of course, can be there to help. And Dr. Burris, being a pediatrician, can speak in depth about this. And of course, Dr. Kim can talk about it because he's a father of 3 children, so he's got some in the saddle experience. So we're talking about that today, and we're talking specifically about breastfeeding versus bottle feeding. You mentioned something before I let you go about emotional thing. To me, it seems like that bonding period of that child with the mother during the feeding has a very unique bonding experience. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I will. I think that women who don't breastfeed worry that they've missed something that can't be replicated a different way, and that's not 100% true. But breastfeeding does release a hormone called oxytocin for the mom, which is a bonding hormone. And yet, that hormone is also released just by holding your child. We release oxytocin when we pet our pets, our animals. So it's not that that's the only way to have that really sweet bonding experience. And so I always recommend that for people when they're feeding their baby, no matter how, to go ahead and really focus on what they're doing. So watch the baby's face, talk to the baby sweetly, maybe sing to the baby, really make it a time where you're focused on giving that baby love and attention. And then no matter how you're feeding the baby, it's going to really be a great bonding experience between the parent and the child. And that doesn't matter whether it's the father or the mother, or even a grandparent or other relative. So that adult taking care of the baby and feeding the baby at that time will help to build those bonding connections, both for the caregiver and for the infant.
It's great information. Hey, before I let you go, I just want to take a second and remind everybody that if you are not under the care of a primary care physician, now is a time to reach out to Coachella Valley Direct Primary Care. The number's on the screen there at 760-642-5549. You can check out their website at CoachellaValleyDPC.com and find out more. It is a very unique practice. It's not the typical practice you're used to. It is more of, I'm going to say, a concierge feeling. We're members of their program. So if we have a question, we can go in there. And as I said earlier before Dr. Burris came on, his membership has its privilege where I can text or call. And I really can talk to them in person and do some telemedicine. It is very unique, and it's a different way. And I think it's a way that is going to be more of the way of the future. Having that choice. Dr. Burris, Dr. Kim, thank you so much. Hey, before we go next week, you kind of alluded to a little bit, there is a language that a child speaks. And it's amazing when I'm around. I remember my older sisters, when they have a baby and they'd bring the baby over and that baby would do something. I'm like, I have no idea what they're talking about. And they would know instinctively, it seems like, what that meant. I can't wait next week to talk about the language of a newborn and how do we speak to our baby.
That sounds perfect.
All right, you guys. Well, hey, we have a holiday between now and then. So I want to wish you guys happy Thanksgiving and all the viewers happy Thanksgiving. Make sure to tune in next week when your personal health takes another baby step into learning the language of your infant. Until next week, happy holidays, everybody.